All right, good afternoon, everybody. How are y'all doing? Yeah, you woke up from lunch yet? I'm still working on it myself. That was pretty good. I'm a Texan, but I live in Boston now, so anytime I get anything close to a taco, I eat a lot of them. So this is Opening the Black Box, Becoming a Better Developer Through Debugging. Howdy, my name is Dustin Yance. I am Mills Yobtaff basically everywhere on the internet, except for Yahoo, and I'm still mad at that person. I had to get Mills_Yobtaff. That's just insulting. I am an engineer at a company called Acquia. We are a managed hosting and many other things company based out of Boston. We are founded by the guy who created Drupal. So I am primarily a Drupalist. I've been doing that for about 10 years. This talk was originally aimed at Drupal developers, but everything in it is very generic PHP stuff. If I run into an example that is too Drupal-y, point at me, and I will make sure I translate it. You don't have to worry about taking notes if you don't want to. All of my presentations go up on my GitHub, so you can check them out later. At the very end, there is a slide just full of references and some of the books that I talk about, so you can get to those very easily. So you can just sit back and relax. So, an older version is, this version is not just yet. So the question is, what is debugging? It's kind of a loaded word. Just a couple of things to think about. There's a company called Glitch. They're an online Node.js editor, kind of like CodePen, where you can go and you can do backend and frontend Node.js directly in the browser. It's pretty neat. They wanted to know, what's the worst thing you ever did with code? Which is a pretty great question. The person working the Twitter account, their code took down a client's intranet mid-demo. That's pretty bad. It's not something you want to do. This guy, Zach Holman, if you don't know his name, he was one of the early hires at GitHub. He's one of the guys that wrote most of their early code. He once shipped the entirety of GitHub to production in development mode. That was pretty neat. I'm sure that the servers didn't like that too much. Jen Schiffer, she's a JavaScript developer. She works for Glitch. She might have taken down the China MBA site for a few minutes while she was switching the nets from New Jersey to Brooklyn. That was long after they moved, by the way. This is my favorite. My first client patch caused all their W-2s to print with the deceased box checked. It was a nunnery. I killed an entire nunnery. We should all aspire to be as great as Kay Cravens is. And of course, here's my admission. I used to work for the University of Texas Libraries. On the first day of the semester after Christmas break, I took down the entire library website because I screwed up an htaccess file, transferring it over FTP. It truncated the first 2 characters for some reason. Turns out those are pretty important to htaccess. At least it wasn't finals week. So, what is debugging? I'm going to go into a couple of examples of problems you might run into. If you are a Drupal developer, this will look very familiar to you. If you're not, what I can tell you is this is a Drupal page that has no styling and no JavaScript applied to it. So, maybe you've seen this, maybe you've heard of this kind of thing. What's the problem? What could it be? The first step to debugging is figuring out what is wrong. So you've got a page that's nothing but text. Maybe your CSS is aggregated but not cached. So in Drupal, you have a way to take all of you can have 50, 60, 70 CSS files, and you can concatenate them together, moosh them down, send them over the wire, and sometimes that messes up. That's a very common problem, and then you see just text. Maybe for some reason JS has been blocked in the browser. I think this used to be more of a theoretical, but now more and more people are aware of what is running in their browser, and they're using things like Ghostery and OneBlocker. So this can be a pretty common thing. It's amazing the number of websites you come across where blocking scripts breaks the entire website. Another Drupalism, file permissions in sites' default files. This directory is where Drupal likes to stick basically everything. All of your generated images are going to go there, your CSS, your JavaScript, and it is very common for the permissions of this folder to get messed up, and then everything falls on its face. So these are all possible causes. And this is where I come into this idea of the semantic difference of debugging versus troubleshooting. You probably know both of those words. You probably think they mean the same thing. But I like to think that debugging is a little bit more. So is this a problem that takes 5 minutes to fix, or is it a problem that takes 5 hours? I like to think if it's 5 minutes, it's probably just troubleshooting. And if it's 5 hours, it's more like proper debugging when you're going to need to break out your full toolkit. Is it the kind of thing that you fixed, or is it the kind of thing that you understood the problem and corrected? It's very easy to want to jump in and do a thing, hit the big red button, the nuclear option, when you know that's going to get the site back up and running. But then you never know if that's going to happen again. And then it's kind of a ticking time bomb in the background. So if possible, maybe you want to try to figure out ways that you can go back and understand and correct the underlying problem. So what is this black box from the title? I'll tell you a little story about myself. Maybe this sounds familiar. Non-technical education. I have a film degree. I have a psychology degree. And then I went back for another film degree. I'm incredibly employable. You have self-taught web skills. It was while I was working as a filmmaker that I got into making websites because everybody needed a website in the mid-2000s. And I was the guy that kind of knew HTML. And of course, I had above average Googling abilities. So I was able to figure out how to make these websites. And of course, you probably spent a lot of late nights staring at error messages. They just have no idea what they mean. Does that sound familiar to anybody? I'm guessing I'm seeing some nods. So, for those of you that don't know, what is Drupal? And when I say Drupal in this context, you can insert basically any sufficiently complex piece of code that you didn't personally write every single line of. It's anything that you're using that you don't know front and back. So when I finally kind of came over the hump and started being actually good at Drupal, which was like year 9, one of the things that I realized was my mental model had evolved a bit. In the beginning, this is kind of your mental model of any kind of complex web application. It's a black box. You know that you throw stuff at it and stuff gets thrown back at you. You don't really know what's happening inside of it. It works, we guess, until it doesn't, and then we're in a lot of trouble. And then, you keep working, you get a little bit better, you do some Stack Overflow, and all of a sudden, you understand so much more about it. Now it's a black box, but at least you know the status indicator, and you know what kind of stuff is inside of it. You haven't moved along too much. This is where we take a little detour into my childhood. Does anybody know this book, Maniac Magee by Jerry Spinelli? This is a really great book that I discovered when I was a kid. It is the story of a boy named Maniac, not his Christian name, who is preternaturally good at untangling knots. He becomes known in his small town for being able to untie any yo-yo knot, any knot in your shoestrings, anything, he can untangle it. So in the town, there is a place called Cobble's Pizza. It's a small store, little convenience store that sells pizza. And out front, they have a flagpole that hasn't had a flag on it for years. And hanging from that flagpole, the rope has tangled itself into the biggest, gnarliest, grossest knot that anybody has ever seen. And Cobble, who owns the store, has decided to turn it into an attraction. So he puts out a challenge to anybody in town who can untangle this knot. They'll get free pizza for an entire year. And if you're a kid, that's better than like $1 million. Like, who cares about $1 million? I want pizza. So some kids bring Maniac to this knot because they're like, obviously you can untangle this knot. You can untangle any knot ever. So do this and we'll get pizza for a year. It'll be great. And he's like, okay, cool, I'll do it. And then right next to the knot, there's a picnic table. And he sits down at the picnic table. And there's this big whole crowd of kids, and they're just looking at him like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm looking at the knot. And they're, okay. And he spends the entire day just sitting on that picnic table, staring at the knot. He's tracing all the paths with his eyes. He's getting a feel for it. After a while, he stands up. Everybody kind of holds their breath. He goes over to it, and he just starts poking it with one finger. And he's just getting a feel for this knot. Night falls, all the kids have to go home. They're all really disappointed. Next day, he comes back, and it's just him and one or two friends. And after an entire day of looking at this knot, he finally starts poking at it. He finally starts pulling little bits of the string. And it takes him an entire day, but he untangles the knot. It might sound like kind of a weird aside, but this is the render path line of Drupal, a very small part of the Bootstrap process. This is Drupal 7. This is Drupal 8. We really like to complicate things in Drupal. Kind of looks like that knot, doesn't it? So the idea is you have to start at the beginning. You can't just rush into it. You want to have some idea of what it is that you're doing. You want to know about your tools. You want to know about your workspace. You want to know about the problem that you're trying to fix. Because when all you have is a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. This is the greatest hammer that was ever created. So we're going to talk about tools for a minute. The first thing, the most obvious thing for any developer is your text editor. This is where we live. This is what we get paid for. But it kind of breaks down into three categories. You've got text editors. I put those in quotes. You have text editors, and then you have IDEs, or integrated development environments. So what's a text editor? These are very basic things like Notepad, TextEdit, Nano. Basically every operating system is going to have one of these. These are incredibly basic. They're usually just black text on a white background. They're not going to do any kind of syntax highlighting. You're going to have to hit the spacebar 4 times every time you want to put an indent. But if it's all you have, you can make do. I think a lot of us probably started here. I definitely spent more than my fair share of time inside of Notepad when I was younger. But eventually you have to grow up. And you have to move on to the next step. And that's where text editors come in. These are things like Notepad++. If you didn't know, there's a bigger, badder brother to Notepad. Dreamweaver, believe it or not. Like I said, I used to work at a university. And if you know anything about universities or large enterprises, they're really weird sometimes about what they spend their money on. And they're really weird about what they let you install on your computer. So at the time, they wouldn't give me the money to buy something like PHP Storm. They wouldn't allow me to install anything that I would want to install. So I learned how to use Dreamweaver as a text editor. And once you turn off all the stuff it tries to do automatically, it's actually a pretty decent text editor. You can have color schemes, you have syntax highlighting, it auto-indents things for you. It doesn't have all of the plugins that you might want, but it works if you have to. Hopefully you don't have to. Sublime Text is pretty popular. Its ripoff Atom is very popular. I never thought I would add this to the list, but Microsoft VS Code is really rad. It's come a long way in a very short period of time. And then on the command line, you have something like Vim. So again, we have something on every platform. Dreamweaver, Sublime Text, I believe are the only ones that actually cost any money up here. And if you've ever seen a demonstration, I don't think anybody pays for Sublime Text except for me. But these are all very good. This is what most of us have used for a long time. They've got all the plugins that you could want. They can do the syntax highlighting. They can do auto completions. They can do all kinds of really nice things. And then the next level is IDEs, integrated development environments. The big one for us is going to be PHP Storm, Eclipse, Komodo. So these are available across the different platforms. And these are generally more singularly focused. So PHP Storm, like the name implies, is for writing JavaScript. It's for writing PHP. And it's very tooled towards that. And so personally, I shied away from it for a long time because I did more full stack stuff. I did a lot of HTML, a lot of CSS, a lot of JavaScript, and it felt forced to try to do that inside of PHP Storm. Now I'm much more focused on PHP, and I've spent the last year just intensively using PHP Storm, and I can't imagine going back. It does a lot of amazing things. The one feature it has that literally it could have no other features and I would still use it is when you're looking at a function call inside of your code, you can command click on that function and it'll take you to that function wherever else it is in the file system. And for PHP, I don't know if you know this, sometimes we have layers and layers of stuff. And being able to jump to it is the greatest. If PHP Storm did nothing else, I would still use it. I've spent hours and hours trying to configure Sublime Text and Atom to do the same thing. It just doesn't work, or it doesn't work as well. So I'll stick with PHP Storm. Eclipse, also good. Komodo, I haven't personally used, but somebody shouted it at me when I gave this talk last year, so I added it. In the world of PHP, IDEs, there aren't as many as some other languages, but JetBrains in general has really made a push in the last couple of years to make specific environments for a lot of languages. And they now have, it's a little bit weird, but they now have a subscription model where you can get access to basically as many of those as you want, which is really kind of cool. If you do want something much more tooled towards JavaScript or Ruby or iOS, whatever you want to do. So these are things to know about. These are things to investigate. I'm not saying you have to use them, but just know that they're there. Try them out. See if they fit the way you want to work. And of course, we have operating systems that have built-in text editors like Emacs. That's the one nerd joke of the talk. So we know about our text, but what is our environment? How are we actually going to be working with this code? We have a couple different options here. First, on your server. So when I broke the library website, it was because we had a staging server and we had a production server, and that was it. My first day on the job, I was given my SSH login to the servers, and I logged in, and I started dumping my, like my vimrc, my bashrc, kind of customizing things the way I liked it. And then about 2 hours later, these two nice ladies from down the hall walked into my office, and they're like, "Hey, you must be Dustin, the new guy." I was like, "That's me." They're like, "Are you logged into the server right now?" I was like, "Sure, yeah, why?" "'Cause all of a sudden, our stuff looks really funny." And that's when I learned that the library had a single SSH login for every developer. That was fun. Number one, don't do that. Everybody should have their own login. They're not expensive. The idea of, are you working directly on the server? Which in many cases we were. We would go in and live edit code when we needed to make quick changes. I don't recommend it, but it's how we worked. This is one of the things I recommend, is working on your machine, setting up your machine to act as if it was a server in some way. And even better, on your machine, but making it act almost or entirely exactly like the server that you're going to be working on. That's kind of the holy grail, is replicating production locally, so you know that stuff is going to work in both places. So what do we have? So if we're working locally, we're talking typically FTP development, what people like to call cowboy coding. And this is, you copy the files to your local, you open them up, you edit them, and then you FTP them back onto the production server. And every once in a while, your FTP client just drops a couple characters, and then an entire website goes down. That's fun. Local environments can be something like MAMP or LAMP or Vagrant. And then the next generation of things includes, these are a little more Drupal specific, Calabox and Lando are Docker-based setups to replicate Drupal hosting and WordPress hosting. And also things like Drupal VM and Homestead, which are Vagrant versions of the same thing, where you are building a Linux server inside of whatever kind of computer you have, and then working directly against that. So FTP development, cowboy coding, one of the biggest problems is you have no version control up front. If you don't have version control, I would say learn version control. It's the one thing that I'm surprised that is generally not taught, even in computer programs, that should be the thing you learn in day one. Version control means you use something like Git, G-I-T, to take snapshots of your code at any given time. So, if you have a file and you're working on it, you can step back through the history of that file and see what has changed. And if you realize in a week that you screwed something up, you can easily look back at the history and find out exactly when the screw up happened and correct it pretty easily. It's the bee's knees. You also generally have little debugging visibility, and this is kind of the most important thing that we're going to talk about is visibility. Maybe you have access to the log files, but in many cases you don't. If you're in a situation where you share logins for an entire server, that probably means your sysadmin doesn't have things set up properly, so you can't access the logs. True story. You can probably do debug statements. You can do var dumps, print Rs. If you're doing Drupal, you can do DSM. If you're doing, I just learned today at lunch, Laravel has something called DD, which is basically the same thing as DSM. It's pretty rad. And if you're using Drupal, maybe you have access to the watchdog logs. So in Drupal, you actually can write specific log messages to the database that you can view inside of the Drupal web UI. And so you probably have access to those. So yeah, things like print R, which is the raw dump of the variable. You generally get no formatting or very little formatting. You do something like that. A quick and dirty trick that I learned years ago is to wrap that in pre-tags. And then you get like a somewhat nice graphical output on the front end, which is nice. So you have your indents. Things like DSM or Kent or DD. These give you a more formatted output, which is nice. But these are all pretty basic, pretty raw, and they're not the best for doing some nice debugging. If you're working locally, what kind of options do you have? You have MAMP, which is the Mac version of LAMP stack locally. Dev Desktop is a Drupal product that gives you a complete Acquia stack locally that you can use. You can set up native LAMP if you're on a Mac or on a Linux machine. Or now, if you're on Windows and you have Linux installed, which is another weird sentence that I wouldn't have understood 15 years ago. But in this case, the code is running entirely locally. You never have to talk to the server unless you have to update your code. And one of the really nice bonuses that I learned while I was consulting and traveling too much, you can work offline, which is really rad. I live in Boston now. I used to work for a company in New York, took the train a bunch, which was a lot of fun. It has internet, which I will put in quotes, because you're traveling through a lot of country and you're going to lose internet a lot. So being able to work completely offline is really nice. You get all of your outputs, your print Rs, your DSMs, your Kints, your DDs. And then you can also generally set up, with some effort, something really nice like Xdebug. How many people in the room have never heard the word Xdebug? Cool. How many people actually use Xdebug once a week? Well, I think everybody's is broken. That's the problem. Okay, we'll get into a little bit more of that later. And then we have the next generation. And this is what people are looking right now and working on. So like I said, Calabox, Lando. Calabox is from a company called Calamuna out in California. They have recently released a command line interface of their next generation that they're calling Lando. They're kind of nerds. This is specifically aimed for WordPress and Drupal work. It is very tailored for work with Pantheon or Acquia hosting, which is really nice. They've talked to Pantheon and Acquia and figured out what versions of PHP they're using, what versions of MySQL they're using, and they're able to replicate that using Docker to a very nice degree of verisimilitude, which is nice. So when you do something weird on your local, it's going to work on production. We have things like Drupal VM or Homestead, which are just customized versions of Vagrant boxes. These tend to be a little bit more heavyweight than a Docker setup, but I honestly prefer Vagrant, mostly because in my past life I was a support developer, and I had at any given time 15 different websites I was working on. And I really like being able to have everything inside of a single Vagrant box rather than hopping between 15 different virtual machines. If you get to sit down and work on a single product every day, Docker is probably going to be the way to go. But again, this is just to let you know about these things so you can go out and investigate them, see if they work for you. With this type of setup, you're going to have your prints, your DSMs, your Kints, your Xdebugs. you're also going to get something nice, which is you can start doing pretty accurate performance profiling. So you can find out when things are slow, why they're slow. On production, you might use something like New Relic, where you can see in production what is slow. But you can also do it locally before you push it out. So you can find that one time you accidentally called the database 15 times instead of 1 before you push it out to production and cause pain. And some of the options are XHProf is kind of the old one. It was a product of Facebook. Then they stopped loving it. So it doesn't work at all on 7, I believe. So Blackfire and Tidewater are two new, they're both open source projects and companies, because that's what everybody does now. But they do have free open source versions that you can install and use yourself, or they sell the service much like New Relic, where you can use them locally and on production to figure out what is going on. So, as I promised, what's Xdebug? Xdebug is what is known as step-through debugging. It will let you literally hit pause on code execution. This lets you do things like inspect the current state of the stack, which I put in quotes. This is a term you'll hear thrown around a lot. The basic idea is when you load basically any PHP application, it's going to load a lot of different files, a lot of different functions to do one thing. If you've ever run into a PHP application that's all in one file, you should probably run away. We like to break things up nowadays, but it makes it sometimes a little bit more opaque when you're debugging. So it's nice to be able to have a place to look. The stack is literally a list of the names of all of the files, all of the functions that are currently being executed. That's all it means. And you get to see exactly what's happening. One of my favorite things is you can actually modify your values live, which is really cool. One of the client projects I worked on a couple years ago was a learning management system, where as you progress through the steps of a chapter, basically, you were assigned points. And every once in a while, a cron job would run. It would tally those points, and it would either progress you to the next set of things, or it would leave you where you were. And the logic for this was, I don't even know, it was like 19 different branches of if-else loops. It was pretty complex stuff. It was the developer who wrote it. It was his first time doing object-oriented programming, and it definitely showed. And what we realized was there was a single if-else branch that we didn't have access to. It wasn't possible to get there. It was a dead end. And we discovered this by running Xdebug and refreshing a whole lot of times and actually manually modifying the points as we were going. And we could see that when it got to a certain point total, it would actually turn negative because it was going through the wrong thing. And that's the kind of thing we could have figured out eventually. Like I think a lot of times maybe you'll go into your code and you'll just reset a variable directly before the thing that's about to happen, and then you'll just keep changing that variable over and over again. This is a way to kind of step back and not even bother touching the code file and modify those values as you're going, which is really useful. Xdebug, you might also have seen something similar if you're using the web inspector on your browser. Chrome and Firefox and Safari have the ability to inspect and step through debug JavaScript code right in the browser, which is really nice and super useful. I've tried giving a live demo of this, and I screwed up every single time. So I'm not going to do that. We can go out in the lobby and try it later if you really want to see it. But there's lots of really good tutorials. I've got a couple of links in the end of this that are, again, more Drupal specific, but they're very PHP agnostic in the long run. But there's also lots of really good tutorials online. Xdebug is one of those things, much like his is broken currently, most people's is broken because it can be very finicky. But once you have everything set up right, it works like a dream, and it's great. But getting all of those checkboxes just right is a little bit of a pain. Are you using PHP Storm or something else? Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a common story. I will say that PHP Storm, of all of the things, it's the easiest Xdebug setup I've ever had. It's really nice. I used to use a third-party client called CodeBug that I paid like $75 for because I was like, yeah, I'm going to support this guy. This is great software. And then he literally disappeared off the internet. So that wasn't great. So if you see CodeBug out there, don't use it. So we've taken a look at some of our tools. We've talked about some of our environments. But here's the thing, something has happened, something is broken. And generally the default state of anybody when their website is broken is this. The site's down, something's wrong. What are we gonna do? Somebody's yelling at you, probably 3 people are yelling at you, maybe 5 people are yelling at you. So what's our first step? Relax. That's step number 1. This is DHH. He's the guy that created Ruby on Rails, if you don't know him. And he likes to say, unless you're making software for rockets, self-driving cars, or pacemakers, ease off the mission-critical nonsense. Yeah? I have a quick question. Does anybody here work on nuclear missiles, MRI machines, self-driving cars? Okay, cool. I guarantee you can relax when something goes wrong. There are very few situations where you actually have to be concerned because a website is not loading in a browser. Going back to Maniac McGee, getting angry with the knot is never going to help. The knot doesn't care. The knot's just going to be the knot. The problem that you're dealing with is always going to be a problem, whether you're freaking out or you're calm. So let's relax. So again, our first question, what's broken? Is something not showing up? One of the questions we like to ask in Drupal land, is it new content? Did you actually publish that content? Marketing people are really great at having lots of plans about the exact second that they're going to publish some new piece of marketing material. And then of course, before double checking, they email the CEO. And they're like, hey, check out my really great work. And immediately after they hit send, they realize that it's not actually on the website. And then they get really stressed out at you. And in Drupal, it is very common for people to draft things in advance, save them in an unpublished state, and then do silly things like forget to publish it. So let's start with the simple stuff, the basic stuff, before we get too crazy. Is it old content? Are the permissions set properly? If you've ever used Drupal, if you've ever looked at the permissions page, it is just a horrifying nightmarescape of checkboxes, which is both good and bad, because you can have very granular permissions on basically anything that Drupal has to do. It is often very common for like a Drupal 6 site to be migrated to a Drupal 7 site or a Drupal 8 site, and that old content will live as a new content type separate from the current one, and those 2 different content types are going to have different permissions. So maybe you forgot to say that marketing people get to look at old stuff. So always double check that. Is something showing up that shouldn't be? Maybe you've got a bunch of raw HTML and JavaScript that somebody got off of Stack Overflow and copy and pasted into a WYSIWYG field. Nobody's ever done that. So we want to start with the simple stuff, and then we want to work from the bottom up. In Drupal land, we call it the white screen of death. It's when you get a 500 error on your server, and all you get is a white page. You get no content, no output, no idea what's happening. And the first place you want to look to find the problem is your log files. If you learn nothing else from this talk, learn this. Learn how to find your log files before you need your log files. This is a very common mistake. So 2 things, learn Git, learn log files. Those are the things you got to do. Every server is probably going to have log files set up slightly differently. Between different flavors of Linux, they're in different places. Sys administrators like to put them in weird places sometimes. If you're using managed hosting like Acquia or Pantheon, know where you can find them in their UI. If you don't have direct access to the server, It's important that you know how to get at them, and important to know that you have permission to view them before you need them. There's a tool I really love called Multitail. It is a Linux and Mac utility that lets you view logs. So if you've ever gone onto a server to look at logs, you probably typed tail-f to look at the logs while they're streaming. Multitail, the number one thing I love is it will color code the output. So every new line will be a different color, making it very easy to see without squinting at the timestamp when something happened, which is really nice. Another great thing is you can look at multiple log files on a single page. So it is, in the PHP world, it is very common for PHP and Apache to both spit out a different error when one thing happens. So with Multitail, you can tail and view both of those files at once, and you can start to correlate that, oh, when somebody does a get on this specific path, then PHP runs out of memory over here. And you can start to put those things together and trace back what the problem might actually be. Now the question is, we know what is broken roughly. Where is it broken? In Drupal land, we break everything up into modules. You have your core modules, your contrib modules, and then your custom modules. So is it something that you personally wrote or somebody on your team wrote? Somebody put something wrong in there? Is it a template issue? We have template.php or .theme files, depending on what version of Drupal you're using. And these just kind of define the basics of your theme. Or is it like an actual template file? Is somebody trying to do logic inside of a Twig file again? One of the greatest things about Drupal 8 is you can no longer do raw PHP logic inside of Twig. It made all of us a lot happier because you could see some real bad stuff in the old days. So we have an idea of what is broken. We have an idea of where it's broken. But here's the thing, people are still freaking out. There we go, Kermit. So again, we need to relax. And this is where we bring in the scientific method. I hope everybody remembers the scientific method from school. I know American education is kind of rocky on that subject. But just to remind you, the scientific method means you, line by line, step by step, test, measure, and repeat. And this is debugging. This is what I finally realized my personal definition of debugging is. Rule number 1, change one thing at a time. Number 2, test that change. Number 3, repeat. So what I mean is, don't go into the admin and click 19 different buttons and checkboxes and press save and walk away. Just because maybe that fixed it, you now don't know which of those 19 actions fixed the thing. Maybe it was one of them, maybe it was 3 of them, maybe it was some magical alignment of all 19. Unless you have an idea of what actually broke the site, you're never going to be able to fix the underlying problem, which is what we really want to do. So, one thing, test it, repeat it. Again, going back to the being stressed out, a lot of times you're going to be getting yelled at by somebody, and they're going to be like, why are you taking so long? You need to do this faster. One method we try to use, if you are using some type of hosting that either you have nice control of or it's managed, and you can do things like take snapshots or kind of take a branch of your code and a last night's database backup and do your debugging on that instead of the production, that can kind of help alleviate some of these things. So like, with Pantheon, it's really nice. I'm a big fan of theirs because you can literally click a button and spin up an environment with a perfect copy of the production database and the code at that exact moment. And then you can go in, you can do whatever quick fixes you have to do, like clearing cache to make the production site work. But then you have kind of a forensic site that you can go back and actually rip apart and debug. So that's the kind of thing. It's going to depend on how things are hosted. But at the very least, I hope you have daily database backups. That's going to be kind of the biggest thing there. Coming back to version control, if you didn't know it, Git is your friend. Git is great. It lets you save your progress as you work. When you're working with Drupal, we have these really fun things called feature modules or config management in Drupal 8. And these are ways to take all of the stuff that lives in the database and dump it out to code so you can actually see all of the configuration. And if you're using that in combination with Git, you can start to take snapshots of your config at any given point, which helps make the rabbit holes that you're debugging a little bit easier to manage. Git bisect is your friend. This is one of those ninja moves that I only recently got into. It's a command that lets you isolate the changes between any two commits. So for git bisect to work properly, you need to commit your code pretty regularly. Maybe not every time you hit save, but at least once every couple hours, just commit your code in situ as a working copy. And then when something happens and you're like, well, things are broken here, but they worked on Wednesday, you can use git bisect to start going in between those two times and find when the problem was introduced to the code. There's a lot of bugs, for whatever reason, they only like to show up on Tuesdays or on February 29th. And so it's really useful to be able to kind of step back through time sometimes to see what might have caused the problem. This is a nice little diagram from The Art of Debugging, or The Art of Troubleshooting, pardon me, one of the books that I recommend at the end. The basic idea is you have a assembly line that takes normal teddy bears and turns them into Christmas teddy bears. But currently something is very wrong. That does not look like a Christmas teddy bear down at the bottom. Along the way, you have 45 different operations that are taking place on this assembly line to turn the teddy bear into a Christmas teddy bear. If there is a problem, where should you look first? As somebody who didn't like math much in school, I'm pained to admit that math tells us right in the middle. Bisect it. It is the mathematically proven quickest way to find the problem. You start in the middle. You open the door. You look in. Does the teddy bear look right or does the teddy bear look wrong? If it looks right, then the problem is later in the process. If it looks wrong, the problem is earlier in the process. And then you just keep cutting in half, cutting in half, cutting in half. I believe that's Zeno's paradox. And eventually you find where the problem lies. It's really nice. Git diff is your friend. It helps you remember to remove your debug statements. This is one of my things that I always screw up. I'll go in, I'll drop in 19 different debug statements, I'll remove 17 of them, and it's not until I do a git diff and actually read through the code that I remember, oh, I did open that other file and put a debug statement there. I should take that out. Anytime you're ready to commit stuff that other people is gonna see, it's a good idea to do a git diff. Make sure, number one, that you didn't leave anything you shouldn't have left, like angry comments to yourself about how much you like or dislike the client. Also, you want to ensure that you only changed as much as you actually needed to change. When you're fixing a problem as you're going along, you might realize that it was actually only these 2 lines over here that were necessary to fix the problem. And you can go back and revert those other 19 changes that you made. Because every time you touch code, it's Murphy's Law that something could possibly go wrong. So you don't want to change more code than necessary. And this is a good way to get a visual of the changes that you've made. And of course, you only commit butts to master once. That's very embarrassing. Especially when you don't have permission to force push to the branch. So git diff, check it out. There's another one, git blame. Git blame helps you find your enemies. No, it doesn't. Git blame is your friend, and I like to say that git annotate is your friend. So git blame and git annotate are actually the same command. What they do is they take a file line by line and tells you who was the last person to change that line. You can do it directly in GitHub nowadays, which is really nice. I believe they call it history there. But it lets you see, in a given code file, you might have 19 different people that have touched it. I'm using the number 19 a lot. I don't know why. But you can have a lot of people that have touched that file, but maybe only one person wrote that little function that changed a bunch of stuff. And this helps you track down who wrote that code, the code that broke something. But this isn't a witch hunt. I think this is an important thing to note. It's very easy when you're frustrated about things to get mad at somebody, particularly when you're getting mad at them through a computer screen. But really, I like to use this as a chance to find the context for that issue. Because to you, this looks like a stupid, dumb, idiotic piece of code, but to them, it made sense last week. And if you can find out why it made sense, you learn a little bit more about the code. Maybe it's something that was specifically requested by the CEO, and it has to work that way. And now you have to, instead of reverting it, you have to figure out a way to do it a little bit better. Maybe it's something that they came to a conference and they learned about using array map, and they did it in a really weird way. But now you know that it wasn't them just doing something stupid, it was them trying to do something new. And so the two of you can sit down and take a look at that and figure out how to use that new technique in a better way. So this is a little bit of empathy for your fellow developers and Git annotate. I still type git blame just because it's shorter, but don't think about it as blame. What kind of debugging methods or techniques might we have? Walk away, seriously. If you can, if you're really physically affected by the situation, if you're frustrated, if you're angry, just take a walk. It's really great how easy it is to take your mind off of things if you just go outside, get some fresh air, look at some birds. I had a coworker for a while who insisted that his daily walks were billable time. As far as I know, the client never complained. He made it work. Made him a better developer. Talk to a coworker. When you're stuck, when you really don't know what the problem could be, talking out loud can be very helpful. Possibly even to a rubber duck. Is anybody here familiar with the rubber duck method? All right, so for those of you who don't know, the idea is it doesn't have to be a literal rubber duck. It can be any object or a mental construct, but you want to speak out loud the problem from start to finish. Because when you have been working on something for a long time, your brain has wrapped its head around this entire problem set. But at a certain point, it's going to get stuck in these little loops. And it's going to keep looking in the exact same place for the problem. And if you're not finding that problem, you're going to get really frustrated because it's going to be hard to break your brain out of that loop. So if you explain from the beginning out loud, just speaking to somebody as if they know nothing about the problem, maybe it's not even somebody technical. I do this, I talk to my wife a lot when I'm stuck on problems. She's a technical person, but she's not a coder. And I'm able to say things that she doesn't understand at all. But through the act of explaining it, all of a sudden my brain will trip over the actual answer, the thing that I overlooked, the place I didn't remember to look. It's a really great technique. Write it down by hand. It sounds kind of weird for a bunch of people typing on their laptops right now, but the problem earlier I had with the LMS, part of the solution for that was for me to sit down and make a grid and write out all of the different conditions for the if-else loops that were being called. And so it was like if, and then an if, and then an if, and then an else, and an else, and an if, and an else. And I started going through the code and making check marks every time I found a complete path through that particular function. And by doing that, by going line by line, condition by condition, that's how I located the actual empty condition that was the dead end. And it's the kind of thing that, yeah, you could probably figure out just by staring at the code. But there is an actual kind of mental leap that you take when you bring motion into it, when you bring physical activity into it. So don't be afraid to write things down by hand. It's really great, even if your handwriting is as bad as mine, because who writes anymore? The final debugging technique, make the future easier for yourself and for others. And this is what I like to think of as proactive debugging. So you found out what the problem was. You found out where the problem was. You fixed the problem. Now, if you can, let's take a minute to make things a little bit easier in the future. A lot of times this is going to be logging. These are a couple of different ways. So in Drupal, we have both Watchdog and then we have Logger, D7 and D8. And these are just code you can insert at any point to write something to the log. So you can take a variable at any point, you can output it. You can take various error messages, you can output those. You can use monologue if you're in the pure PHP world. In Drupal, we have a thing called syslog. What this does is instead of writing Watchdog to the database, it writes it to disk, which is the proper place for such things. And it lets you do cool stuff like our friends out there, Elastic, showing off their Belk stack. Companies like Loggly, companies like Sumo Logic. These are methods to aggregate all of your logs into a central location. So, you know, like the website that I work on currently, it is actually run across 8 distinct web servers and 2 distinct database servers. All of the logs for all of those servers feed into Sumo Logic, and we're able to, you know, run reports. We're able to look for specific error messages. We can then take that error message and plot it over time, which, you know, tells us really obvious things like a lot of people use the site on Monday mornings. But, you know, you can see those kind of historical trends. You can set up alerts. So anytime you have more than 3 errors of a certain type, send me an email. You can set that up, which is really nice. So now you are getting warned before it breaks that it's about to break, which is really nice. And of course, the thing we should all do and probably don't do, write a test. When you find the problem, if you are working in a tested code environment, the reason you found that problem is probably because there wasn't a test to cover that specific scenario. So now you can take the time and write that test, and hopefully it won't pop up in the future. It could be simple tests, PHP unit, Behat. I've become really enamored of Behat recently. If you don't know what it is, it's described as behavioral testing. So instead of testing an individual piece of code, it will actually launch a headless browser. It will load the website, and it will perform actions on that website. So you can tell it, try to go to this super secret PDF and make sure that it tells you access is denied. You can set up tests like that really easily, which is really nice. And I would say if you are working on an existing project that has no tests, probably the first place to spend your time is some kind of behavioral testing. I think it is going to catch what the outside world considers to be problems the quickest and fastest compared to spending all of your time writing individual unit tests. It's pretty cool. So further reading, these are the different things that I pulled some of this from. The Art of Troubleshooting is a really great book. It's available for free online, so it is one of the best places to start if you want to read some more about this. Debugging, the 9 indispensable rules for finding even the most elusive software and hardware problems. It costs money, but it is also a really great book. If you are working in Drupal, Debugging During Development is a really good blog post turned into a book. Using the PHP Storm debugger by our friends at JetBrains, if you want some advice on setting up Xdebug inside of PHP Storm. And of course, my favorite, Maniac McGee. Check it out, it's a really great book. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions or war stories anybody wants to share? I can try. Yes, in the back. Yeah. Oh. All my animations. There we go. Any other questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So the comment was one thing to think about is if you have like kind of external dependencies, or if it's something that works differently internal to a network, external to a network, have a way to actually check that out. We had a problem at Acquia recently. We started setting all of our internal systems behind Cloudflare because we were having trouble with people attacking us. And we ran into quite a few problems where we had no idea things were broken because internally everything looked great. And we had to do, luckily we have global offices, so we were able to, call our Brisbane office and say, hey, can you go to this page? What kind of error are you seeing? And debug it that way. But if it's, just a smaller team or, just in general, you can set up, we use VPN sometimes for that. So that'll give you an external IP address so you can come at the problem that way. So yeah, it's an excellent point. Yeah, I think in general, not just the things I said, but like think about all of the different possible ways something could fail, whether it's network related, whether it's if something takes too long to return related. All of those different things are going to be avenues where you need to proactively set up debugging techniques. Cool? Yes? Yeah, I'll stick that back up. Wait, do I have it back here? It's actually that guy right there, down at the bottom. There. Yeah. So yeah, I'll upload this latest version right after this. Cool. Thank you all. Y'all have a good day.